no?
Freeze! I'll shoot! How do you know about that? Aren't you Maria?
A serial killer is terrorizing the normally sleepy streets of
This crude drawing
Salem,
of a bell has been left at the scene of several murders
leading
over the
police
past
to refer
few
to the
weeks.
murderer as the Bell Killer.
We spoke with a public relations officer.
Authorities are asking anyone with any leads to contact the
This picture of a
SPD's
bell
anonymous
with a
tip
calling card
line.
the police have yet to attach
no
any
clues
meaning or
and no
significance
leads
to
for the
has
police to
become
follow.
synonymous
And
with
no
the
link
hysteria
between his
surrounding
victims.
his
You're
murder.
saying there are no leads? No leads at all?
Doing something different is an idea that video games had a tough time getting into their heads for a long time ever since the HD era began. Something that they often struggle with today with all their Call of Duties, Battlefields, and Assassin's Creeds. Usually, it's the smaller studios that are the ones to try something different as their scale, and more importantly to publishers, budgets tend to be much lower. Despite how limiting and restrictive to potential this whole situation is, now and then you'll catch one of the big publishers in a daring enough mood to take a risk. Murdered Soul Suspect by Airtight Games is one such risk. Released in 2014, Murdered Soul Suspect was one of those cross-platform games, much like we are littered with now thanks to the continuing scarcity of the new consoles, but back then it really meant that the game could have been held back. Not only did this game risk its own performance and visual potential by releasing on the older generation of hardware, it was also not any kind of action game, instead being a slower, story-focused detective horror game. It was an odd choice for Square Enix to make, especially since they were still not fully recovered from the colossal screw-up that old Final Fantasy XIV was. With all that out there, you gotta give them some credit for being so stupid, though we did get Murdered Soul Suspect out of it. A game whose name is awkward to say in some ways, as well as a lame but lovable pun. Well, is getting murdered a good use of your money, or should we avoid getting murdered at all costs? I don't think you should pay to get murdered. Let's stop talking about dying and start talking about ghosts, am I right? In Killed, Spirit Accused, you play as fedora-wielding Detective Ronan O'Connor as you participate in the hunt for the latest and greatest serial killer tormenting Airtight's fictional rendition of current-day Salem, the Bell Killer. Responding to a call from an eyewitness, Ronan arrives on scene only to find himself suspiciously looking up at the window he was thrown from. After pondering his survival for a hot minute, he gets up, curses at the Bell Killer, and threatens to return and arrest him. He doesn't get far, however, as he finds he can't do something as simple as open a door. When the door surprisingly opens, the person who opened it gasps and shuts it immediately. Confused as to what's going on, Ronan turns around and survival horror quick turns right into something no one has ever seen before, their own dying body lying on the ground. Obviously this comes as a big surprise, but that ain't even it. After trying to climb back into his own body, something that is bound to mess up the best of us if we were to try it ourselves, his would-be killer stomps up to him, picks Ronan's own gun up off the floor, and, as my header said, puts 7 in his chest. The 7 were permanently etched into Ghost Ronan's physical form, which is awesome by the way, and his killer stomps off, leaving our protagonist dead from minute 1, which might be a record for a survival horror style game. Cold and dead on the ground, Ronan is now trapped between life and death, unable to move on due to the unfinished business that led him to his demise. Now with a setup like that, it's up to the now transparent you to somehow stop your killer and solve your own murder as well as many, many others so you can finally move on and be with your dead Silent Hill 2 wife. On your adventure, you meet the rebellious Joy, a medium who can actually see and hear Ronan. This little shit is goddamn awful, but she does bring a much needed cynicism to Ronan's constant positive attitude. You force your way into her party to help her find her mom, a psychic working with the police on the case who has gone missing. It's actually a rather engaging premise, and the game explores Salem's darker history in a messed up, albeit over the top and cartoonishly dark at times, way. It may be typical in a lot of ways, as well as have the most unlikable side character in the history of games that aren't Sonic games, but the mysteries behind the Bell Killer, as well as what's going on in Salem itself, are interesting. Nothing here is revolutionary, which may seem bad considering the story is the entire game, but it's a fun B horror movie that sticks to its guns and actually paints an interesting take on what it means to die with unfinished business. As I just mentioned, Ronan is trapped between life and death in order to solve the mystery, but he isn't the only one. On your investigation, you'll find other ghosts, each one trapped in their own hell, often of their own making. Yes, scattered around the environment are plenty of other spirits to shoot the shit with, and some even have side quests to complete. The side quests are rarely anything other than smaller versions of the main gameplay investigations, more on those later, but they do offer a deeper look into the world, sometimes into the history of Airtight's version of the world. Other than that, Ronan can find hidden objects scattered around each area that will unlock ghost stories when all the hidden items for each area are found, and let me tell you, some of these are horrifying. That actually goes for the game as a whole, really. It's a pretty bleak world and story, and the ghost stories are not the only thing adding to it. The ghosts themselves are rarely there for happy reasons, much like Ronan, with most of them having died in accidents, being murdered, or having killed themselves. It's pretty dreary, and talking to them doesn't make it any less so. A lot of them are unsure of why they are there, even more are traumatized and stuck in place. It's a game that completely lacks any kind of joy, well, aside from the little bastard you're stuck with for the story, and it treats its own bleakness as if it were normal. Regardless, if you can handle the dreariness and it's not like it's overwhelmingly dreary, the world is fascinating and the ghosts only add to it, making it feel more fleshed out. The gameplay in Soul Suspect is a lot simpler than you might expect and is definitely the spot that can hold the game back to most. You control Ronan from a third-person perspective and saunter around the environment like you do. The biggest difference with this game from a movement perspective is that Ronan can pass through quite a few objects, being a ghost and all. When inside an area like the apartment building the game starts at, Ronan can pass through most walls and objects, giving you free reign when traversing the floor. This is an odd thing to get used to actually, due to the fact that you aren't traversing ancient castles or different dimensions, you're in the normal world that we all probably live in ourselves, making it seem odd to be able to just no-clip around all willy-nilly. Of course, you don't have completely free reign, as there are some objects and walls you can't pass through. You see, Salem was an interesting place, as it had some pretty famous trials that happened back in 1692, which led to the town being blessed, at least here in this game. Ghosts may be free to roam the new stuff, such as cars and benches and such out in town, but they can't pass through anything from the old town, which all buildings happen to still be from. It's an interesting way to give the player a boundary and to lock some things off from them. These objects stand out, so it won't be too cheap, and the objects themselves are also incredibly out of place, like they were ghosts themselves. Other than that big, more unique thing, moving around is fairly simple. You can run, hide in these weird pockets of ghost residue, which you can quickly teleport between, and eventually you get a teleport yourself. Nothing overly complicated or really that unique. With your basic ass movement out of the way, the primary gameplay loop of Murdered Soul Suspect is an incredibly simple one, as mentioned. You find the area you're supposed to visit, like the apartment building, you enter and then travel to the destination in said zone. Along the way you can talk to any ghosts you see, learn how creepy and sad they all are, help any that ask, and be on your way. When you make it to your destination, an investigation zone opens up. Here you scour the area for any clues that might help you. With a press of the touchpad, you can open your journal to find your clues for the main story, or clues for any side cases you might uncover, which are the ghost helping side quests. This menu will tell you how many clues are in each investigation area, which can help you determine if you should keep looking or not. When you are in each zone, different actions can be used to find your clues. It might not always be as simple as walking up to it and examining it. Some clues require other clues to find, and some require you to pick 1 to 3 different words to match what is happening. For example, say you examine a gun case on the wall and there are scratch marks. You'll have to select the words from the jumble given to you that point to the fact that it can move. If you fail, the game will chastise you for it and remove one of your badges, which doesn't do much more than act as a useless ranking system. Other things you do to get clues include manipulating objects and possessing people. Once a person is possessed, you have one of 4 context-sensitive options to use: mind read, eavesdrop, peek, or influence. The first three are easy, though reading someone's mind rarely ever provides a clue, but influence is the one you'll be using the most. When influencing someone, you'll want to pick one of your clues that'll make the person you're possessing think about information to help you. It's a clever use of a ghost's abilities. Once you collected all your clues, you press the triangle button to conclude the investigation and put all your clues together in order to move ahead in the larger investigation. Now this sounds big and impressive, but what it really is you picking the most relevant clues to the question the game is asking you. It may not be anything insanely accurate, in-depth, or revolutionary, but it's still an enjoyable process. I love a good slow burn every now and then. It's not fast-paced, meaning you can play it at your own tempo, and you just sit and watch the B-movie play out. Despite only 3 or so of the clues being needed to complete the investigation, picking up the other clues not only fuels your gamer OCD to collect everything, but also does add some slight details to the world itself. While not chatting up dead folk or investigating up investigations, you wander the larger zones you were put in, or the town of Salem itself, in order to find the hidden items for ghost stories, ghosts to help, or other collectibles. Now when I say collectibles, what I really mean is lore, as nothing here is there for the sake of just being there. Everything you pick up gives you some kind of information, whether it be on Ronan's past or Salem's history. It's actually pretty smart to actually reward you for collecting, and its reward is perfect for the kind of game it is. It's a purely story-based game, so the reward for collecting items being more story fits. The collectibles are also not that hard to spot. They are kind of an orange glowing light or a warbling texture, making them less of a pain to collect than you'd expect. Now, I really doubt Square Enix would have let Airtype make a game with no kind of conflict or fail states at all, would they? No, instead they have to muck it up with something. Every now and then you'll come across demons, creatures that look like Dementors from Harry Potter, and you'll need to sneak by them in order to progress. If sneaking is not your style and you need everything to die, you can creep up behind the demon and execute them with a QuickTime event. If they catch you, you'll get a second chance if you complete a QuickTime event, but they really aren't that hard to avoid. This is where those ghost hiding spots come into play, as for some reason you can see them and effortlessly hide in them, but demons can't see them at all. Often it's smarter to kill them all so you can look around the zone in peace. Now these are not offensive, they are just amazingly underbaked. You can hold the R1 button to flat out show you where all the hiding spots in the zone are, and this view also shows you where the demons are. There's no gauge or limit to using this ability, so there's zero downside to abusing it when demons are around. The demons also can't catch you off guard either, as you'll know that they've entered a combat zone since they always do a screech when you do. These could have been a cool dynamic to the game if they were more developed. The demons have incredibly simple movement routines and never deviate from them unless you distract them with ghost crows. Then they'll zip over to them and stare at them for half a year so you can stealth kill them. If their AI was better, they had more movement animations, showed up more randomly, and didn't announce their arrival, they could have made the game way scarier. As it is, they don't even enter different rooms, they just sort of patrol the hallways of the zones you're in, meaning you can easily use the rooms to get the drop on them. The only demons that are an actual threat are the lost souls that inhabit black and red, goopy, evil-looking portals on the floor. Failure brings you to death, and they exist solely to block you off from areas. In the end, the demons are a huge missed opportunity, doubly so by how much of a threat the characters in the game make them out to be. Blue. That is the first word that comes to mind when discussing the visuals of the game. All games of this era were brown or grey, though color was slowly returning to the industry at this point, so it was a fresh color to see be the central focus. Other than the blue, the visuals are not too bad, nothing special, but they do the job. The one area that they are great in is the ghost effects themselves. The art direction for how ghosts look, especially Ronan himself, is stellar, and the demons do look threatening despite not actually being so. Overall, there isn't much to say about the visuals as it just takes place in the normal world, but the meshing of the modern live town and the ghostly old town, complete with destruction and active ghost flames, is incredibly cool to see. The actual living people, however, definitely look like a late PlayStation 3 game. Nothing bad about them, but nothing great about them either. Some also have a case of Mortal Kombat ladyface and look like monsters at times. There is one thing the game does amazingly, however, and that is the apparitions you see. As you are roaming the zones, or the town of Salem itself, you'll see ghostly figures in the distance. At first, I wasn't sure what was happening, but upon close inspection, you see that there are silhouettes of people from the old town that are scattered around the environment. It's incredibly eerie and builds so much atmosphere, effectively being scarier than the big bad demons. They are no threat whatsoever and tend to disappear before you get anywhere close, and for good reason. Once you get a good glimpse of them, you see that technically they are just flat 2D images of people, and they do tend to repeat a lot. It's not fair to downplay them though, as they are simply there to show that the old town is still around, even if you can't actually see or interact with it. On an audio level, the music is nice and eerie, even if it doesn't stick in the brain, though the main theme does sound a lot like Bloodborne's, which is awesome. The game is more about atmosphere, and it does a nice job of it, bestowing upon the already dreary world its somber dance partner. The soundscape where you are mindlessly exploring is silent, with ambient noise to put you on edge at all times, even if you know when the only threat to Ronan arrives. The voice work is also solid, nothing amazing and with some oddly delivered lines, but they do their job. The voice work for the ghosts also tends to add more believability and life, as odd as that is to say, to the limbo you inhabit. Overall, it isn't a revolutionary technical marvel, but it does the job and then some thanks to that creepy apparition effect. Of course, it's not exactly fair to heap on the praise and mosey along without talking about how goddamn jank the game is. In cutscenes, the game is mostly fine, outside some weird technical performance at times, but in-game it's pretty janky. Ronan needs a lot of leeway to move, making moving to a precise location fairly tough at times, and sometimes you need to be in a specific location to actually interact with something very specific. Animations outside cutscenes are cookie cutter, and Joy's sneaking animation is pretty goofy. There are some pretty odd bugs at times too, like Ronan seemingly forgetting he can't pass through some objects, or maybe fighting against that reality and ending up on top of them for a second before getting pushed off. One of the biggest bugs I ever found was during a side mission for a ghost on a beach. Nothing about the investigation itself was bugged, but upon completing it, the audio totally died, meaning I couldn't get the story payoff for the quest itself. Another being the mission objective never updating after a certain point in the game. Thankfully, neither amounted to much, but they do exist and personally make this game a lovable kind of jank. The game also has an outdated take on a mental hospital, which you can't really fault only this game for, as it's a video game staple. Even Mr. Cage is guilty of this, or should I say, of course Mr. Cage is guilty of this. Now you don't see anything really go on inside, only the mention of shock therapy. To be fair, this wasn't completely banned until just 2 years ago in 2020, and considering where murder takes place, it's not entirely shocking to me that it's still a practice used there. Despite the character's harsh words at entering the hospital, we do get a pretty good one-liner out of it. In the end, whatever I say about Murdered Soul Suspect doesn't matter, as the world and Square Enix already made their minds up about it. The game was critically panned and sold poorly, causing Square Enix to shut Airtight Games down. However, to me personally, this just makes the title of the game even more fitting. The game was flat out murdered, with price being a big gash in the game. At the time of launch, it launched for full price, and it just isn't worth that. It is, however, worth playing. It's a fun B-movie to play through with a real mood and a brilliant clashing of new and old, with the old town bleeding into the new one. This is a big case of big publishers not understanding exactly how to sell new ideas, and a good example of why they don't take as many risks anymore. Regardless, Murdered Soul Suspect is a great time, a prime example of something that should have been nurtured and expanded on instead of extinguished. Luckily, the director of the game, Yosuke Shiokawa, went on to be the creative director of Fate Grand Order, and I think that game ended up doing slightly well. Just slightly. If you are down for a slow, spooky adventure and willing to put up with some grade A B-movie jank, you should have a great time. I'm going to give Murdered Soul Suspect a solid 7 out of 10. Just don't stand in the front of the demons. I think that's the only way the damn things will get ya.